I realized that I had the fear of failure in me as a guy. Would lock the door at my job to my office and just sit in there and just be a mess, and wrestling and like, some of the Davids or the Abrahams, and really started wrestling with God. It led me into a place where I felt a division, even inside of church here, inside of these very four walls, as a matter of fact. When Ray said 1989 in the middle school, I think the only reason we went there is because it was close for Cindy, and she was like, come to church, it's right down the road. So, but I remember walking through here, and I'm gonna tie this together, but I remember being in here and there was no walls. It was just a concrete slab, and it was steel girders, and the top was up, and I remember pulling up, and the parking lot was dirt. Like there was just nothing here. And I was walking through, and this vision and this talks about the journey, even for us to get to where I was, right? I walked through, and we have a baptism tank back here. I know probably a lot of you might not be familiar with it, but kind of where Kyle sits on top of it almost and plays drums. But I got baptized in that tank. I stood here and got married. Like that, there was, I just remember so much about that time. And, so having to deal with that failure, it felt like a failure to the church too. And when we went through that time, there was, so it was a division. And I felt like even in the church body, we took sides. And it was, he is a victim and she's a victim, or he's right and she's wrong. And I just remember feeling, man, like we're missing the point. There's just two people that are broken. So it played out for me with a move. And even in the middle of feeling like I wasn't good enough, there was something that told me I was good enough, and that was my career. And they said, buddy, if we are gonna make some changes in our business, and I worked for a national company, and we're gonna close down the place that you work at in Chesapeake, and we're gonna move it to Richmond. We're gonna make one mega place for our business. It'll be great for our customers. And we want you to run this location for a few months until we merge, and then we'll help you find a position either in the job, in this career field, or help you transition. And I was like, okay, well, gosh. And they said, oh, by the way, we're gonna bump you up in pay and give you a little bit more responsibility. So I said, well, okay, great. So I did that, right? And again, we're talking about this journey and the call of the Lord, right? And how that can be a distraction. So I did this position, and at the 4-month mark, sure enough, we closed down the building here, and it moved to Richmond, and they said, gosh, buddy, you did a fantastic job, and we don't want to lose you as an employee. You're valuable to us. And we want you to go to Richmond and work there, and we'll give you another bump in pay and a little bit more responsibility. We just really appreciate what you're doing for us. And I thought, man, this is fantastic, because you know what? In my head, I'm disenfranchised with my church. I'm going through a failure. I'm not happy. And now it felt like someone was throwing me a safety line, right? Whereas before, all I felt like is I'm treading water and people keep throwing me boat anchors to help save me. And I feel like it's just dragging me under the water, right? So of course, I'm like, someone's telling me that I'm valuable and that they love and accept me. I'm on the first car out of here, So I go up there and was going through the divorce. And so there's this just complete mess in the divorce where in order for me to keep my son like full time, I have to prove how his mother's a bad mother, right? And my lawyer is telling me, look, buddy, I'll fight for you. Like, I'll help you fight it. But if you lose, and there's probably a good chance you will have less time with your son. Like, how does a father have to choose that, right? So, and I'm going to give me a little bit of grace to gloss over that, just out of respect for people who were hurt by that event and who were close to it, right? So this move to Richmond led to like some smaller compromises, right? Some concessions. And the best way that I can describe the beginning of this next journey in my life is with a pencil. And when you write with a pencil, over time, does someone have a tissue? Can someone grab a? So over time, thanks. Thanks, I grab a tissue. So over time, the pencil gets dull. You know how that is. You start to write, and it's precise, and it's like a good pencil is it's an instrument in someone's hands, right? But what happens over time when you make the smaller compromises and these concessions, that pencil starts to get dull. And that's what started to happen to my thought processes and my decision making, is it became dull, and things that were not acceptable started to become acceptable. And I'll tell you, because I stayed in Richmond for 9 months, and they came to me again and said, buddy, we are just incredibly proud of you, and what you've done has just helped us out tremendously. We're getting ready to go through another thing in Cleveland, where we're gonna move Cleveland into Pittsburgh. And what you did for our employees, see, when we moved Chesapeake, every employee that was there had a job when we closed. I made sure of it. I helped them write resumes and train them up. And our company was like, that sort of, we need you to go up there. And so as a reward, as a thank you, like, we're gonna bump you up in pay again. And I'm thinking, man, life doesn't get any better than this. Like, I am killing it, I'm crushing it. Like, I've got this amazing career. Like, I never dreamed of it. You know, when I was little, my dad was, he was an E6 in the Navy, and my mom, she cleaned houses to make sure the family was taken care of. Like, we just didn't have a lot of extra. And so here I shoot out and am on this rocket ship almost. And it's almost overwhelming. I felt like I was looking at someone else's life. You know, I was like, certainly this can't be happening to me. And so I go to Cleveland in 4 months. That moves over to Pittsburgh. Now, they've said, we understand that we have a son, you have a son, so we're gonna make this easy for you. We're gonna fly you home every other weekend to be with them. We're gonna get you a hotel, rent you a car. All your meals are paid for, by the way. Don't worry about your cell phone. Don't worry about your gas. Everyone in here I know is saying, man, that must have been great, right? The price of cell phones today has just absolutely gone off the charts. So I'm like, well, sure, I'll go to Cleveland. I did the 4 months. As they merged, that leader left, and they came to me again and said, buddy, gosh, like, this is a great opportunity. It's a great time. You've been faithful with, in business terms, you've been faithful with what you've given. We're going to add more. So I moved to Pittsburgh for another 2 years. Just couldn't believe that it was my lifestyle and what I was going through. Just absolute blessings. And 2 years goes by, and they come to me again, and they're like, buddy, and I know that this sounds absolutely ridiculous, and it was even more ridiculous to live it and to experience it. So they moved me from Pittsburgh to Jacksonville, Florida, and then stayed there 18 months, and they did it again. We love what you're doing. They moved me to Arkansas, right? So I know everyone's super jealous right about now, Arkansas, right? And I made all the jokes about living in Arkansas that forgive me, but I have too many teeth and all the things, everybody gave me, a lot of trouble and grief over it. But it was either that, they said, hey, we've got 3 positions. You can go to LA, New Jersey, or Memphis. And Memphis turned into Little Rock. I was like, I can't see myself in LA, as crazy as this lifestyle is. Jersey's just not where it's at. So I hit the Midwest and I was there for 6 years. But remember, I said that the pencil was getting duller and duller. And so by the time I hit Cleveland, it was acceptable to go out and have a couple of drinks, just a couple, after work, stressful day, have a drink or two, no big deal. So by the time I got from Cleveland over to Pittsburgh, it had turned into a few drinks to a few too many drinks on a few nights of the week. And I think you can see kind of where this is going. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but those few too many drinks on a few too many nights led to some recreational drug use, right? And then you know how this story continues to unfold. The recreational drug use turned into a binge drinking. And then that binge drinking turned into an alcohol addiction, to where it was just who I was at that point. It was okay to go out and, you can tell that I'm a pretty slim person. So, to drink 7 or 8 beers in a night was just a regular night. It just became that, and the alcohol addiction paved the way to a drug addiction, right? So now I fast forward, and it's, I guess I was there 2008 when this had started to kick off really into it. And, that's another one of the areas that I'm going to kind of gloss over a little bit, right? And we'll just leave it at the alcohol and drug addiction. So. But what I felt was no matter how far I tried to run away, and I would get moving in a direction, and I would turn around, and it's God, still right here. And I would say, okay, well, let me go over to this town or this city. And I turn around, God, right there. Every single time, right? So this kept playing over and over in my head that in Matthew 6:26. And it's just one of those verses that if you're paying attention and you're struggling with anything, it's going to uppercut you like it did to me. It says, okay, so maybe it wasn't Matthew 6:26, and that's okay. So I'll read it off of the version. And everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be likened to a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And I've read that verse thousands of times, but it never really made sense to me until I reflected on the journey that I was in. The rest of it says, this is like the woe me part, right? And the rain came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell. And its fall was great. So about that time that I felt like I was almost untouchable, and I had the 6-figure salary, and in some of the corporate worlds, they offer like a bonus structure that is just, it's ridiculous. So I had the 6-figure salary, and I had the 50% bonus for performance, right? And it almost feels like all of the intersections are coming to a point in my life. And when you're in the middle of it, you kind of, you get a whiff of the hints of them, but every one of them was more like a yield sign, just cruising right through it. All the yield signs. And so I like to call this next section the implosion. So here I was on a 12-year journey to really run from my problems. Just running from them. Just felt this love and acceptance and said, man, I'll just move. And so that sabotages relationships when you don't put a root down. It allows you to just move from like relationship to relationship, and not just friendships, but like people who trusted me with their love, right? But I knew in the back of my head I would never stay in one place long enough to really put roots down. So I came home for Christmas one year, and my father had been struggling with some illness. He had multiple sclerosis. And so what we didn't know is he would go to the doctor's office and get the report and then come home and tell us that, oh, it's okay, like hiding kind of what's going from the family. But I came home and we spent some time and I just, when you're young, when you have a young baby, if you watched, and they just get legs underneath of them and they're wobbly, but they hold on to stuff. And it's kind of cute the way they move from thing to thing, and we're patting it so they don't on their heads, all the electrical sockets have plugs in them. Like, it's cute. But when you see your father doing that, it's no longer cute, right? And I saw him moving through the house, like just. About a month after going home, we got the news that our company had been bought out. So now I'm living in a place that I really don't want to be, but it's a means to survive. I have this sense of achievement almost, and I feel like that the winds are blowing and they're beating on the house, and I just feel the beginning of that coming on. And so then my son says to me during that same trip, "Dad, I'd like for you to live here when I start playing sports in middle school and high school." And so I have a father who is declining. I have a career that is declining. I have a son who now is basically telling me, "Dad, you weren't there for me." So I made the choice and I said, "You know what?" Had a couple of discussions. They said, "Buddy, you've been with us 11 years. The reality is the other manager for the company that bought you has been here 30. You're probably not going to have a job, so let's start looking to move you someplace else." So the HR person comes into town, makes it official, and says, "But hey, we can move you back to Jacksonville and find you a spot there." And I remember being so bitter at the time, my comment was, "Great, so I can be the cruise director on the Titanic because none of y'all will have jobs in a year." The bitterness was rooting in, So I said, "Okay, on May 1st, I'm out of here." It was like kind of the second week in January-ish, and I went on this great, this kind of the final tour, if you will, of like all of my old hangouts and all of my old friends. And on May 1st, I loaded up my car. I didn't even move. I basically gave away everything in the house that didn't fit in my 2008 Dodge Charger, right? Like if it didn't fit inside of that car, it was not coming with me. Bed, couch, TV, everything. Because I had started to hear this little voice inside of me at the end of one journey, feeling like there was more, right? So I drove back and, I started spending time with my dad and with my nephews who were struggling in school, got to reconnect with my son, like this story. You can feel the tide starting to change in here. About a month after I came home, I realized that I was going to put roots down, and that so I went online and I went to a dating site and said, this is it. Like I'm gonna find somebody that I can actually give to. I felt like I was at a point where that needed to happen. And so went on one date and it was not great. Went on met a second person, and that person is not just my better half today, she's my best half. So she made me promise that I wouldn't make her stand up or come on stage. And, a healthy fear of your wife it's a good thing, guys. So but I love you, Felicia. So now I'm back here and I'm re-engaging and I'm coming back, and I said, now's the time I'm gonna try to go back to church, right? I hear that voice and I realized that the love and acceptance that I went through this career changes was really searching for a love and acceptance in God. So I made the decision. I told Felicia and kind of sprung it on her because we weren't going to church anywhere, and she was like, I'm in. Like, if this is where you want to go, I'm in. I felt like I found my Ruth almost, right? And there's a double meaning there because my mom's name is Ruth, and I always joke about how similar Felicia is to my mom. So if you can't see her, she's shaking her head at me. But I made the decision. I was like, gosh, there's only really one church I can come back to, right? I've got to come back to the place where it all started, the place where so I was feeling this pull back. So the first week I got up for church, and I started to have this battle in my head. And I don't know if I'm sure I can't be the only one, but I started with the what ifs. Anybody ever struggle with what ifs? A lot of people shaking heads, I'm sure. Well, here's a couple that David says, no way. I said, what if nobody remembered me or even cared if I came back? What if? What if people were going to judge me for a failed marriage? What if the leadership was disappointed in the person I'd become? What if I wasn't good enough for God? So it took me a couple of weeks to battle through the what ifs and actually get in the car. So now it's the Sunday. I've actually made it out of the house into the car, and the car's running. I'm making progress. I'm sure you guys will know where this is going. And then finally one Sunday, I actually made it to the church parking lot. This is about a month and a half of the what ifs. It was a struggle. So I remember sitting out in the parking lot with the car running in park. And I started going down this list of what ifs over and over again. And so I put the car in drive and left, never came in the building. Took me 2 tries. So I'm glad God is a God of second and sometimes third and fourth chances, right? So I stepped in the door and immediately was greeted with love and acceptance right here in our church. There wasn't a single person that looked at me and went through any of the what ifs. And that's why I love being a member here at this church. And so when I studied and read through exactly what I was going to share for, now that I've gone through the background, I remember I still have another 2 hours to finish. So just buckle in and keep your arms and legs in the windows. I really thought of, and this has been a theme at our men's group, about Jonah, right? And it's such a silly little story almost. It's a Sunday school for kids story. Like, everybody knows Jonah and the great fish, the whale, And I was like, certainly, God, you don't want me to share this up front. Like, it just doesn't seem, like this would be something that everybody can learn from. And then, but of course, I didn't want to wrestle with God and started to read through it and asked Ray some questions over a week. And as I got into it, I found it's exactly the one, right? See, the word came to Jonah a first time, as it did to me when I was in high school. And for Jonah, it was to go to Nineveh, and it was to handle some business there for God. For me, it was to become a mentor and to really preach the gospel to young men. It was very clear, and I found fulfillment and purpose in it. But then Jonah went through a little sleep and a little slumber when his ship was caught in the mighty storm. If you look at verse 1:5, it says, but Jonah had gone down into the hold of the ship in the middle of this storm. He had laid down and was fast asleep in the middle of a storm. That might be unbelievable to most, but if you ask Felicia, she was like, nope, I believe you could actually do that because you fall asleep in 2.9 minutes every night. So, but does it sound familiar? Again, back, a little sleep, a little slumber. And, most of us are familiar with the stories in the belly of the fish for 3 days. Everybody on the ship was like, they casted lots. Jonah's name came up. They said, you must be the reason for this. Jonah says, all right, I'm going to make it go away. Throw me overboard. So they're like, gladly. He goes overboard. The fish grabs him, and he spends 3 days in there. And I don't know about you guys, but the digestive tract of a whale doesn't seem like a great place to hang out for 3 days. And I imagine it was messy. And I imagine it was just disgusting. So much so that in verse 2, or chapter 2, verse 5, he says, the waters encompassed me even to my soul. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. And I thought, man, I can't think of a better expression for the way I felt for 12 years. That the waters had encompassed me. They engulfed me. It was my life, right? And I looked at a couple of different versions of this verse, so that's different than what we have on the screen. But when I read the waters encompassed me, even to my soul, I got the meaning of what he was crying out to God almost, And I felt that way for 12 years in drugs and alcohol with with the weeds wrapped around my head, the losing the clarity of thought. Being in that belly of the fish was like struggling through an addiction. In Jonah 2:7, he goes back on and he's talking to himself, he's talking to God, he's having this wrestling match, and an internal wrestling match with himself, with everything. And I felt that way with the church. I felt like I was in a wrestling match, going through these things that happened. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. I don't know about you guys, but I felt for years that my life was ebbing away. And that's not a quick event. It's not something that is an overnight event. It's not one thing. It's that dulling of the consciousness. It's the pencil becoming dull, your mind, the clarity, everything. And it felt like the weeds were wrapped around my head. Anybody ever feel that way? The ebbing away? But listen what happens next. In Jonah 2:10, it says, then the Lord spoke to the fish. He commanded the fish, right? And it vomited Jonah onto dry land. It was an immediate change from one place to another. It was like when on May 1st of that year, when I decided to leave Arkansas and come back to Virginia Beach, I felt like I was being vomited out of this disgusting situation onto dry land. I didn't feel like the water had encompassed me anymore. I didn't feel the weeds around my head. And I felt clarity. But are you ready for this? Jonah 3:1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. And he had a clear direction again. And he was moving from one place to another. So when I finally had the courage to step back through the doors to church, I stopped facing the what ifs. And I stopped giving way to all the things that were holding back. You see, God's faced them all for us already. He put his son on the cross for that very reason. So we don't have to play that movie over and over again in our lives. So I started to show up to church a little more regularly. I'll use regularly a little loosely. Got into the men's group on Tuesday nights and started attending the lunch on Thursday. And the setup in the beginning was to explain what I was longing for in that search. Then I went on, and I won't expand too much because I don't want to give away the details, but I went on an Emmaus walk a couple of years ago. And I know we don't share a lot about it from the front. And I can't be specific, but there's an event on Sunday that happens. It's usually right after lunch. But that was when God came to me a second time, and I heard a second word of the Lord. I didn't hear it from him. There wasn't a burning bush or anything cool. I almost wish sometimes I would see one, you know. But God chose to speak to me through other people at that time that weren't even in front of me. And I got to have this experience of people saying that they were glad that I came back to church, that they were excited that I was helping in the men's group, that, you know, like all of these affirmations came out of all directions. And it was all these what ifs being just mowed down because I was tired of, in the men's group, I was like, gosh, am I in the right place? Am I doing the right thing? Like the what ifs don't ever stop. But I remember the word of the Lord came a second time. I was clear on which gifts God wanted me to take advantage of and knew exactly how to make the biggest impact, right? The fulfillment, the love, and the acceptance. See, I'm on a journey now and have been for a long time, on multiple journeys, But this one now is to make sure that the word of the Lord doesn't need to come a third time, right? So, but I understand that everyone's in a place where we're on our own journeys and our responsibilities, and God says two things, and he's like, follow me and take care of my people, basically. If you could just mash it all down into two things. And so that relationship with God has to be in place first. And I'm kind of, now I'm here, but I'm really sitting listening to myself talk to myself in the audience, and then the take care of the people part is at what place on the plow do I put my hands and get in the fields with everybody else. But I'll tell you, if you're here this morning and you're struggling on the what ifs, I just want to let you know it's okay. If you're here this morning and you've been wrestling with God's call in your life or need to hear a word of the Lord, again, it's okay. But what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to just come up to the front, and there'll be some of the staff up here to pray with you and to walk you through kind of a next step. And so what I'm going to do is quietly and reverently dismiss the church, right? So that we can move on. And those that want to come up, I'd like for you guys to just take the opportunity while people are in motion to slide up here and let us pray for you. Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that we can just enjoy a friendship with you, that we can talk to you honestly and openly, that you know what's in our hearts. And God, I would pray that anybody wrestling today with the what ifs, anybody wrestling with direction or peace in their lives would have the confidence to move forward. God, we pray all this in your name. Amen.